Hi, good evening. My name is Joshua Price Cole, and I am indeed the Managing Director and Executive Producer at the Hopkins Center for the Arts at Dartmouth. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight. We have an amazing show scheduled at 8 o'clock, and you definitely know that if you're tuning in here, because here we are to talk about this incredible work called The Temp that was written by Taylor Bynum and librettist Matthea Harvey. And we have those two artists and the other conductor of the piece, Filippo Ciabatti, with us tonight to talk about the creative process behind the work. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce first Matthea Harvey, who is a poet and a prose writer and a professor and the author of the libretto for The Temp. Hi, Matthea.
Hi.
Next, we have Taylor Bynum, who is the conductor of Dartmouth's Coast Jazz Orchestra and the composer of the piece. Hello, Taylor.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome. And last but never least, we have the conductor of the Dartmouth Symphony Orchestra, Filippo Ciabatti.
Good evening. Hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
So good to see you all tonight. Before we get started, I got some questions I'd like to ask you. But before we get started, Taylor, would you like to acknowledge the moment that we're in right now?
Yes, I just wanted to recognize there were some very heavy losses in the creative music community this week, including Chick Corea, the wonderful pianist and composer, Milford Graves, the percussionist and philosopher and scientist and martial artist and mystic, and Johnny Pacheco, the amazing arranger and co-founder of Fania Records, the sort of legendary salsa label. We've all suffered so many personal losses in this past year. I think seeing the first anniversary of this and this piece having come in just under the cloud that we have dealt with COVID, I just wanted to take the time for all of us to acknowledge those losses and celebrate those lives and remember what we have learned from those that came before us and what we will continue to try to manifest in our actions and our deeds and our compassion and in our curiosity. So if we could all just take a moment of silence and a breath in and a breath out together. We haven't had art and performance as a means of processing all of these losses. And so let's take the time, let's look forward to that day when we have that live again. Let's appreciate these recordings and these reminders of what we can do. And let's take this moment to think about that. So if we could all just take a breath. Thank you. No, thank you for allowing the space to do that.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And now we do get to talk about this piece that was, as you mentioned, one of the last pieces that was performed live in Spalding Auditorium before the pandemic began in earnest here in this country anyway. So to get us started, I'd love to ask Matthea about the libretto for this piece. You wrote it, and I don't even know if wrote is the right word for this, using a really unconventional and interesting technique. And I'd love to hear you talk about that.
So Taylor contacted me and asked me, he knew that I had done erasures before, and he contacted me and asked me whether I wanted to erase Shakespeare, which was a bit daunting. But erasure basically is a process where you take a page of text or a whole book and you excavate your own story or poems from it. So basically you're working in the same way that you would when you're writing, except you're working with a restricted set of language. I actually brought along my little copy of the book to kind of give you a sense of what it might look like there. So I got addicted to whiteout.
Yeah. That's
The Tempest, yes. So that was the process, and I looked at different plays and I kept trying to think which ones would work, and I kept coming back to The Tempest, and initially I was drawn to the word pest, but then my husband actually said, oh, what about the word temp? And then the minute I had the temp, suddenly I noticed there was so much language of business and money and so much ordering around, because the play itself has this very problematic relationship with Prospero and Caliban and Ariel. So it was very easy to sort of find this corporate culture within Shakespeare, which was always exciting to me, to find something modern and then something older. Particular words that I was excited to find were things like jerk in the word jerkin. So you'll notice in the piece there's Mr. Jerk. And there was a cell in the play which turned into a cell phone. So there's a lot of fetch me my cell. Anyway, I thought it's an interesting moment right now, because since the pandemic, of course, the idea of temps, they're in an even more dire situation than before. So it's sort of transformed a little in the times that we're in. But that's sort of a general sense of where it went. And I can tell you about the story or not later.
Well, I'd love to hear more about that. And I think, Taylor, if you want to talk a little bit about your creative process to creating this piece, and how you came about wanting to have a libretto to the piece.
Well, I had the pleasure of meeting Matthea at a poetry conference. I think I was actually there to perform with another poet, and I guess I wasn't loyal enough to. A wonderful poet. I want to give him a shout out. Kevin Carthy, a really brilliant poet who's based in Vancouver, had brought me out there to perform with him as part of this conference. And Matthea and I had met and really, really hit it off. And there's something in her work that I've always loved. There's this absurdity and sadness and beauty and joy and just depth of feeling that I've always been very, very moved by. And so we had hit it off and just sort of had talked about, we got to collaborate sometime. And, I sent her all my records and she had sent me all her books, and we would sort of touch base every couple of years and be like, hey, let's make sure we collaborate sometime. And so when this project came up, it just seemed like the perfect opportunity, because I know she had used erasure. I'd seen the work she had done. Was it with Of Lamb, right? This beautiful book that she had done in collaboration with an artist as well. And that's the thing I should also note. Some writers, I love writing. I'm from a family of writers, but often writers are loath to collaborate because they're so used to a solitary process, where Matthea is someone was just so open to it and so enthusiastic about it that really made it incredibly exciting. And then Filippo and I have been talking about ways to structure a program and just brainstorming about pieces we would be very excited to perform if we did this collaboration and brought together the two ensembles. We're like, oh, well, what pieces would we do individually, and how can we create a connection between our ensembles? And I realized that I had always really wanted to perform Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn's Such Sweet Thunder Suite, which is based on Shakespearean themes. And Filippo mentioned that he had always dreamed of doing Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet. And so we're like, okay, so maybe if we can create this new piece that has some kind of loose Shakespearean connection, that will allow us to bring together this sort of crazy weekend of music. So I pitched that to Matthea, and she jumped at it and found this just sort of magically extracted these beautiful words and this kind of wonderful story from The Tempest. And it's funny because I feel as a composer, whenever I work, I've worked a lot with language, and almost every time I've worked with language, I take the language first. The language, I don't want to write music and then set words to the music I've already written. I love taking the language itself and finding the rhythms and the intervals and the melodies that feel inside of those words already, that sort of make those words sing, quite literally. So in a way, I was almost doing with Matthea's libretto what Matthea had done with the original text, sort of taking it as a found object, accepting it as a beautifully generative constraint, as sort of a creative instigation. And then out of that process, I found the melodies and the rhythms and the intervals that I could hear in those words. And then once that was there, then the rest of it was just lots and lots and lots of orchestration and figuring out what instruments go well and using all my old tricks of improvisation and composition to make it work as a whole piece. But for me, it really came out of the words. And that's the thing I love about this kind of collaboration, is it forces me to think in terms of phrase lengths and intervals and melodies differently than I would if I was working with a completely blank canvas. I think always having, again, I think for the same reason Matthea loves that, it's sort of great having a canvas that's already dirty and already kind of full up, and then you find the things in it and you find what you want to pull out and explore as an artist.
That's great. And I think I'd love to hear about how you and Filippo came to work together, but I feel like in order to talk about that, I feel like we need a brief primer on your method of conducted improvisation, which really provides, because it provides the whole structure for how the piece came to live on its feet. So what do you think about, can you do it in, I've
Sure,
seen you do it in an hour.
Well,
Can you do it
I know. 3 hours later, Taylor is still coming. And it won't be the first time. I apologize. No, I think one of my real priorities with this piece is this was the third time I'd written, I've composed a lot, but usually for my own working ensembles, which range in size from a trio to maybe a 15, 20-piece big band. But 3 previous times I'd written for full orchestra. This is the third time I'd written for full orchestra. And while I was very happy with the first 2 compositions, I still felt like I hadn't scratched the itch I was looking for, which was really to integrate the kind of improvisational practice and sort of risk-taking and freedom that I felt I fully explored in my smaller ensemble work and try to translate that to an ensemble of this size and this scope. We had 65 musicians on stage, and how to allow musicians in an ensemble that large to still have a sense of adventure and freedom and risk and surprise and have things happen that they don't expect and have to respond to that in the moment. And for me, that often is one of my disappointments going to quote unquote classical jazz crossovers, is that one or the other genre ends up being rather flat. Either it's just like a jazz band with a string quartet, which is awesome. I love string quartets, but it's just sort of a little flavoring to make it exciting. Or it's an orchestra with a saxophone soloist, and maybe the saxophonist is improvising, but the rest of the orchestra is playing exactly as they usually do. And I really wanted both sides of the equation to be challenged. In all of my work, I love to have enough compositional structure to push the improvisation into a place it wouldn't go otherwise. And I always want to have enough improvisation to push the compositions into places it wouldn't go otherwise. So one approach to this, one part of this was really embedding the ensemble while it was all student performers, with the exception of some wonderful community and faculty members in the DSO. We also had 6 special guests, 4 instrumental soloists and 2 vocal soloists, who are all artists I'd worked with extensively, some for literally decades. So I felt I knew they would bring something inside of the ensemble. But the other big part of it was that we had the time and rehearsal time to really workshop with the whole orchestra the system and these ideas of improvised conducting, of being able to for a conductor to give cues, to give indications of sound possibilities to the orchestra and have them respond in real time. So in that sense, it's very similar to a traditional conductor, where the musicians in the orchestra are watching the conductor for, instruction on dynamics, on tempo, on when to start, when to stop. So it's basically the same as that, except nothing is written down, except you have no score in front of you. You're responding to a set of cues that it might be a short sound or a long sound or a trill, or sometimes, as you can see in this performance, I'm just going to say, like, Kyoko's doing some really cool stuff as a vocalist. Do that, do that. So sometimes it's very mannered and official and diagrammed, and sometimes it's very impressionistic, just trying to sort of dance the orchestra to understand the sound you want them to make. And I was incredibly moved how the orchestra, both the Coast and the DSO, responded to this, really came together as one large ensemble and really improvised as an orchestra with just incredible sensitivity and risk and adventure. Like I was so pleased by that. And quite honestly, because we had that time to workshop and put together as an ensemble, the other 2 orchestra pieces I'd done were with extraordinarily talented professional orchestras, but with incredibly limited rehearsal time. And so for me, this performance manifested what I was hoping for far more than the previous ones that I did, not despite the musicians in the orchestra being students, but perhaps because they were students, because they were ready to learn, because they were ready to commit to this, because they had completely open minds and were smart young people willing to dive in. I felt it really realized everything I could have hoped for as a composer with this work.
Wow. And Filippo, this has got to be something really unusual for your orchestra members and maybe even for you. I would love to hear about what the experience was like for you and your orchestra members, and particularly the students.
Yes, absolutely. It definitely is and was an unusual experience for me and for the orchestra. And I think, as Taylor said, one of the greatest, I think, part of the experience, there were many wonderful parts of the experience, and Taylor really underlined the importance and the beauty that the whole process, that we were really able to do together, step by step, which, as Taylor said, it happens rarely in our business for a number of reasons. But for the students and for all of us, what I think really was new, it was the opportunity and the possibility to improvise and to understand improvisation. Because, in classical music, or so-called classical music, and especially for orchestra musicians, this doesn't happen anymore. It's interesting because in classical music, actually, if you go to the roots of classical music, Baroque music, improvisation as a discipline was really something that was embedded in what was asked of a musician, right? In the toolbox of what was asked of a musician. In the Baroque time, the organists, all the musicians were needed to know how to improvise. And then as music got more and more formal, we lost that. So that was really a unique opportunity for us to learn from Taylor that improvisation is really a language, right? With its rules, with its discipline, with its freedom, and with its artistic and aesthetic opportunities and goals, right? And I think these embedded in that piece of music was a great opportunity that really our students and myself wouldn't have had otherwise. And I think it was extremely satisfying.
Do you think there are parts of that experience that you could imagine translating or bringing back to the orchestra performing Beethoven or something?
Absolutely. Flexibility and ability to listen, which is an absolute must in any orchestra that wants to perform well, right? Because music is music at the end of the day, and this project really shows that, right? The beauty of doing this with Taylor, that is also a friend, not only a colleague, is that we were able to do it step by step, and Taylor was able to do it step by step with Matthea. So there was really a integrated collaboration, and we rehearsed each other's ensembles, and then we rehearsed the ensembles together, right? But I think, yes, the sensitivity to react to other people's voices. There was a great conductor that used to say, we are really used to talk in life, but we're not that used to listen. And music teaches you how to listen, right? And this whole project, I think, taught us, even more how to listen to each other. And if I may add very quickly, how important it is to meet different people. One great thing that I think all of us, my students, myself, will take from this is the possibility that we had to meet, right? Our students, the students of the coast, maybe with some different backgrounds, and myself, Matthea, and all the wonderful guest artists that were in this. They were amazing musicians. You hear both the vocalists and the instrumentalists.
Yeah, and Matthea, I wonder what it was like for you to write this, hand it off, and then come to the performance and some of the rehearsals, actually, I believe, right? At least at the end. What was it like to experience your work? Have you written a libretto before? Have you had that experience of your words being set to music like that?
No, I've collaborated with a few composers before, but I've never written a libretto. So that was completely new. And that was definitely with the help of Taylor. We sort of talked about how to make things into songs and use repetition and that sort of thing. But I think the experience, it's a very hard one to describe, really. It's sort of like going from 2D to 3D. Or I was thinking about this earlier today. That doesn't quite sum it up. It might be more like bringing all of the ingredients to an incredible kitchen where there are 12 chefs and then having them make you this incredible layer cake where everyone's making a different kind of frosting in between the layers, because it was just so much collaboration, and it was so beyond what I could have imagined. So yeah, the metaphors kind of fail me, but that's sort of what I have to turn to in those moments.
Aren't you the poet? You're supposed to have the metaphors for us. Come on, Matthea. Well, and if I could add one thing that I love about this, that I think Filippo talked about too, was that multiple degrees of collaboration. But also, it's so rare that one's pedagogical goals and one's artistic goals can be so completely aligned, because I feel, my job here at this school is to introduce my students to as wide a breadth of music as possible, or to get them involved in as much creative activity as possible. And then my job as an artist is to do my work and to take those risks and to push forward what I'm looking for and to realize my ideas. I mean, to really have the two so completely wedded like this was extraordinarily satisfying. The fact that we really could pull this off, and I think really a fully professional level performance. I really couldn't I could not have asked for more from the performance of this music from any ensemble I could have pulled together. And to have it be our students, plus of course these wonderful guest artists, providing that was just an extraordinary satisfaction, and just something I think both Filippo and I had to admit we're just very, very proud of, that these students that we worked with stepped up and responded so magnificently. If I could share one short, tiny story about for me, this sums up the process. Right before we're about to take the stage, I wear lots of hats, and anyone who's seen me perform knows I usually perform in a hat. We're about to take the stage, and Filippo was like, "Taylor, you always wear these cool hats when you perform. I hope someday I get to wear a cool hat when I perform." So I was like, "Oh, come on, man, we're stepping on stage. Here you go." And I gave him the hat just as we're walking on stage. And to see his orchestra crack up at seeing their, terrifying maestro step on the stage like a pretty slick fedora, I feel like that was like all of a sudden that was the piece. The piece had already started. People were smiling, we were listening to each other, we were reacting. And that's one thing I love watching in this video is you see the orchestra, all of them having fun, and the singers having fun. And you see that sense of joy and communality that for me is just so infectious, and is one of the things that I just find very moving about watching it as opposed to just listening to it, because and these are the musicians who had all been doing workshops with our guest artists, and then as the guest artists as Kyoko or Jim or Bill or Toma or Michael are taking these amazing solos or improvisations, you see the band like with them and like really digging it, and that for me was so exciting. That really felt like we really were a community making work together.
I can say from being in the audience both nights, which is something I wanted to ask about, but that moment of Filippo walking on stage with a hat and seeing how everybody reacted to that really set the tone, and the audience felt it too. I mean, there's an audience full of people who are used to seeing Filippo in a different way as much as his students are too. I mean, it was really alive. That night, both nights, and I think for those of you who don't know, one night this piece was paired with the DSO doing Prokofiev, and the other night was paired with Coast doing Ellington. So it was really like just an incredible experience to see these two nights of music in a row. I'm curious from any of your perspectives what it was like seeing the same piece differently each of those nights, especially with the elements of composition and improvisation in the piece. It felt very different to me in the audience. Maybe not as different as when I see your ensemble perform, Taylor, where I don't even know it's the same piece two nights in a row. But anyway, I'm curious about that. Who wants to take that? Filippo?
Sure. I mean, I can say honestly, like, first of all, I was grateful to have the opportunity to perform the piece twice, and I think I felt that the piece, was being molded in the moment, and and really, the birth of the piece didn't finish when the piece was performed the first time. It continued through that evening and into the second evening. I actually thought that the two concerts were, I mean, I've seen the arch. I've seen the thing being complete. And of course, probably I've seen it because, again, Taylor and I started the process together. Right? This collaboration didn't start from one having an idea and then, kind of bringing the other along later. This project started as an all cultural artistic arch that was supposed to have a certain theme and certain objectives. So for me, it was spectacularly exciting to see first the piece of Taylor making more and more, becoming more and more life the more we were performing it, and also seeing how the two ensembles with two completely different pieces in different areas were actually complementing each other's aesthetic.
Yeah. We're almost out of time. I want to give people a break before the running off to the concert, but I'm curious, you guys have any future collaborations planned? Anything you want to share? Any ideas, concrete or amorphous?
Yes. And we just want to dream of beautiful things happening somehow in the future for all of us. I know Matthea and I have discussed the idea of maybe trying to find a graphic novelist or an animator, because I think continuing to tell the story, but perhaps in a book form or a projection form. I don't necessarily see it being staged like an opera, but I would love to see the story with some visuals or some to sort of flesh out the narrative more, because again, I think the words and the narrative are so fantastic. And I'm glad we have the subtitles as you'll watch the performance tonight, so you can really follow along with that narrative and catch the sort of intricate beauty of Matthea's language. And I know DSO and Coast are definitely going to be doing some stuff together. We just haven't figured out quite what it is yet. Once we get the masks off, we'll make it happen.
We do have though.
Oh yes, yeah. Filippo and I we're gonna go from giant to tiny. Filippo and I are gonna since we can't bring our orchestras together, he and I are just gonna come together and we're gonna do a chamber works concert in the spring. So keep your eye out for that. That'll be a lot of fun. So that'll just be this kind of collaborative idea on a very small, intimate scale, as opposed to the very big and massive scale you'll see tonight.
I can't wait to see what you guys play on piano and cornet. And I love when I ask you guys about it, because you're always like, well, we're not soon. We don't know yet, but we love the idea.
Was this question just to try to nail us down with a program?
Yeah, it's fun. No, I kind of knew where we landed. Anyway, I want to thank all three of you for coming together for this project, for giving us this work, for giving the students the experience of working on and then performing it, and for coming here tonight to talk to everybody about what the experience was like. So thank you very much. We have a couple minutes to take a break, and then I can't wait to enjoy the piece one more time.
And huge thanks to you and to everyone at the Hopkins Center for helping us make this possible, because it has been done with the deepest support on every level of the production team, the marketing team, everybody. So thank you all so much.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.